Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us on The Frame. We take current events, cultural phenomena, and other topics, and we look at them through a biblical frame of mind. I'm Jacob, and I'll be your host this evening. I have a feeling that we're going to have some great conversations, so let's do it. Well, welcome back after such a long time. I'm kidding. So let's go ahead and welcome our other hosts in, and let's introduce ourselves. Come on in, guys. How y'all doing?
Fantastic.
Yeah, I'm doing all right.
Introduce yourselves.
Well, I'm Tyler. I host here every week. I live close to the mountains and I enjoy biblical subjects. Is that vague enough for you?
That's fantastic.
Okay. You'll also see that I enjoy movies, in particular Jurassic Park. It's a great movie.
Very good. Love that. Love the whole series. I think they're coming out with another one, like next year, aren't they?
I have mixed feelings about that.
Uh-oh.
But Kevin?
How about the fly on the wall over there?
Yeah, I'm Kevin, and I like tea.
It's awesome.
What kind of tea?
Preferably loose leaf, probably black.
Nice.
Like
I'm a
making
jasmine
lattes.
tea or Sakura cherry blossom guy myself. Those are always nice.
Yeah.
But
This one, I'm trying a new one. It's a technically a herbal tea, but it has like dried fruit in it. It has like apple and blueberry. I think there's pineapple.
nice.
So it's very strong for a tea.
I'm sorry. Did you just say herbal?
I caught that too. I was wondering if he spent time in the UK recently.
Did you say herbal?
Herb.
Herbal
It's a
tea.
herb?
Verb.
Well, anyway, so I'm gonna actually go ahead and turn it over to Tyler, and he's gonna introduce our topic for the evening. Thanks for joining us, guys.
This tea doesn't have any caffeine in it, so we're kind of cooked.
It's
Oh, no.
it's 9:00 on a Thursday, everybody.
As long as you hit the right buttons. So
I already haven't. I already missed a cue.
All right. So for our subject tonight, I wanted us to shine a spotlight on the apparent revival that is happening in the West. And when I say the West, I mean the cultural West. So the UK, Canada, North America, the US, North America in totality. But there's some recent research from this year that is suggesting that there's a growth in the church, particularly since the turn of the decade. So I wanted to dive into this, look at some of the numbers, and then go through what our thoughts are on some of the causes as to why is this occurring? Do we think it's legitimate? And just what are our thoughts on this from a biblical perspective? How do we view this apparent revival within Christendom? So we are taking a bit of a departure from our usual, or I guess our more recent subject series of Catholicism and diving into cultural Christianity as a whole. So
Sweet. Let's do it.
With that, I want to jump into the Barna Group survey that recently came out. They found that I'm going to go through a list of stats here, and then we'll kind of discuss. So currently, 41% of U.S. adults definitely disagree with the claim that the church is not relevant today. 24% somewhat disagree. 22% somewhat agree that the church is not relevant today, and 13% definitely agree that the church is not relevant today. Among practicing Christians, 79% definitely disagree with the claim of church irrelevance. And among non Christians, 32% somewhat agree the church is irrelevant. 26% definitely agree. So I know that's a lot there, but just kind of to give us a baseline of where we're at right now among practicing Christians, roughly 80% or 79% to be precise, definitely disagree with the claim of church irrelevance.
Mm.
I would say, I think if you had asked me 2 years ago, I probably would have been in the practicing Christian who definitely agrees that the church was irrelevant. If we're speaking from a cultural context
Mhm.
within the US. Most of my adult life, I have not seen the church make any significant impact on the culture around us in any way whatsoever. I can't point to anything, at least nothing positive. The only things I would have been able to pinpoint to you are stories of like, Hillsong mega pastor caught cheating on his wife. Um, things of that sort, like negative in the news, bad spotlights, and there's still plenty of that going on. But I will say that at least I think since COVID, there has been a bit of a surge in interest in Christianity. Jacob, I wanted to get your thoughts. What's your perspective? What have you seen, and where are you currently sitting at with, how relevant is the church in 2025?
Yeah, I definitely I was surprised to find out those numbers, like to hear those numbers that that many people actually think the church is relevant, that
Yeah,
many
I
people
was too.
that is a complete turnaround in my opinion from the past several years, because honestly the last that I had actually dug into this topic and looked at the numbers was probably, I don't know, 2021, 2022, basically right as like on the back end of COVID.
Hmm.
And like this was like on the back end in the sense of people were essentially just watching church from home still for the most part. Churches were still kind of recovering from COVID, trying to like build their numbers back up. A
Yeah,
lot of churches had closed their doors because they couldn't continue going. They couldn't sustain what was going, with all the people that essentially basically just stopped going because people stopped going on Sundays and realized, oh, I really like having the morning to spend with my family,
yeah,
not going to church. Um, and so I think what actually ended up happening is like it whittled down all the people that were just kind of like going out of religion, and
hmm,
initially kind of the people that were there were people who wanted to be there, people who weren't just there mostly out of obligation, but actually like had a desire to be there.
yeah,
And as a result, I think it kind of kickstarted a little bit of a movement within the church where we started becoming more effective than we have been. Um, but again, like I was still surprised to see these numbers, to see that people are
yeah,
actually saying, like, especially among non-Christians, that they think that the church actually has relevance.
hmm,
Because again, like you said, me growing up, it was very much more so like legalism, religion, a lot less of impact, other than like you would have the small churches who like they would impact the people in their church, and you'd have the big churches that would do like outreaches and stuff, but there wasn't really a whole lot that set them apart from just other charities and
yeah,
organizations that were just doing good stuff anyway regardless. And so people were looking at the church going like, well, like what actually makes you different? And there wasn't much. And we had a lot of the world was impacting the church a lot more than the church was impacting the world, in my opinion. Um,
I would agree with that 100%.
so yeah, I kind of feel like as I'm looking at these numbers and trying to figure out like how that shift happened, like I think a lot of it, like you said, like it's post COVID. It seems as though there's been a return to like the spirit and the heart
Yeah.
behind why we gather. Because it's not just a given anymore that we gather, because COVID killed that. And so we had to actually start asking ourselves, why are we doing this? Why do we gather? Why do we do church? And not just church staff people were asking this, but families at home had to start asking it. Teenagers started having to ask it. College
Yeah.
students were asking it. Why am I doing this?
No, I agree with you, and something you said, I have thought about as well over the last couple years is that COVID, with the option of having like an expanded selection of remote and online services for church, I will say that people who were less serious about their faith kind of got whittled out. And
Mm-hmm.
so, in a sense, it was a distillation of the church, as far as attendees and people who were, adamant about this is something that I want to be a regular part of my life. And so, yes, for a time, churches got smaller, which only sharpened the decline that we had been seeing for decades in our
Mm-hmm.
country. But then now I think we're starting to see a small uptick and, if you will, a return to form, at least according to the numbers.
Yeah.
So with that, I want to jump into our church attendance,
Mm-hmm.
also from Barna Group. And attendance peaked at 48% in 2009. So I assume this is from since they've been collecting data on this.
Yeah.
Um, it dropped down to 27% in 2017.
I
So
want to
from
point out something
48, yeah, yeah,
that's really interesting. 2009, that's right after the housing market crash.
oh yeah,
Like like right after the housing market crash is when the church
yeah.
peaked
And so
at its
that's
highest
something that,
percentage. I'm sure we'll get
yeah,
into that in a
well,
minute, but like I just want to like, oh,
yep, yeah. There's something to be said for crises and a return to faith, which I'm sure our atheist friends would, have something to say about that as well.
oh yeah.
But yes, we will touch on that. So we went from 48% in 2009 to 27
Mm.
in 2017. So that is,
That's almost half. Not
yeah.
quite, but I mean 24% would be half.
I mean, that's just 8 years,
Yeah.
nearly cut in half.
Yeah. Wow.
And yeah, that's a significant drop. I can't really speculate too much as to why, other than it was just a continuation of the degradation of the church's relevance within the Western culture. We were
Mhm.
not effective. People looked at us and we didn't have anything they wanted. And we were desperately trying to copy the world, like you said, in
Mm.
order to fit in and get them to like us more. And that didn't work. I think I think anybody who is, truly close enough to Jesus will know that that is not the model we're called to follow anyway,
Mhm.
but that's just what we've been doing in this like internet age, media age. I would really say it's been more of a seeker focused movement over the last couple of decades within the American church in
Oh yeah.
particular. Like,
100%.
hey, let's get as many souls saved as possible, and then like a complete lack of focus on, genuine discipleship and sound
Mhm.
doctrine and spiritual spiritual disciplines, spiritual health. It's it's largely been like, when you take a broad snapshot of the church, it's largely been, let's just evangelize and get people to know about Jesus. And like, that's a great step to take, but it cannot be the primary. I think it cannot be the primary focus. I
Yeah.
think the main focus has to be making disciples, and a disciple is somebody who follows in your footsteps and does the things that you do.
Yeah.
Um, like that's
It's
what the church has been needing.
and even in the churches where where they have like discipleship and they have stuff that's available to go deeper, it's like
Mhm.
Sunday morning is more focused to we're trying to attract people, we're trying to get people
Yeah.
here, and that's the main gathering of
Mhm.
the church. And so then they're like, hey, if you want to go deeper in your faith and you want to be to become more of a disciple, do more
Mm.
discipleship stuff. Well, now to go like they'll have things where you can go get plugged into programs or like into small groups and stuff like that, which is great. But it's not it's not communicated to the entire church as a whole in terms of some of the deeper things where like, hey, you're the senior pastor, like you're the person who's over all of this. We would like to get some of the deeper stuff from you as our main pastor.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's great getting it from some of the other pastors or from some of the small group leaders and things, but like what happened to actually teaching on some of the more difficult things to explain from a pulpit on a Sunday morning in a way that people can understand who might
Yeah.
be walking in. But also like why are and this kind of goes back to like at the very beginning, like when the early church was meeting in the book of Acts, like, yeah, you had thousands of people that would gather, but you also had smaller groups, and what they did was like Timothy in Ephesus, he was essentially a pastor of pastors. Like he was the pastor of the church in Ephesus, and yes, the church of Ephesus would gather together as a city, but also part of his job was to go and pastor those pastors who were essentially running house churches. But it still didn't take away from him actually going deep with them. And the
Mhm.
main gathering was still the primary reason, the primary act was for the believers to gather together to build each other up, to be encouraged, to be taught, and then go out themselves and make disciples. The purpose wasn't to be like, hey, I think you should have. I think you would do well with knowing Jesus. Come with me to church so you can hear about him. Like, no, it was no. I'm supposed to tell you about Jesus. I'm not supposed to just take you to church so you can hear about him.
Yeah. And I think one thing that we've also seen, especially since the 90s, I would say at least, is the growth of the megachurch model.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I cannot say definitively that megachurches are unbiblical, and I wouldn't
Sure.
want to say that either. But I don't think that we have a biblical model of a megachurch.
Yeah.
Like, I've always been a proponent of if you go to a church, you should know your pastor. You should
Mm.
semi regularly get to speak with and communicate with him. I'm not saying like every single Sunday you need to have a conversation with him, bombard him, like that sort of thing. I know a lot of pastors would be very stressed out if they had to talk to everyone in their church on any given Sunday.
Dude, I don't
But
even get to talk to every student in my youth group every
yeah,
week.
but you should have some contact.
Yeah.
Like I think if somebody is your shepherd of
Mm-hmm.
your flock, you should know them. You should know their voice. You should know their mannerisms and their thoughts, not
Yeah.
just the stage personality they present on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like that's I'm sure there's some room for disagreement in there, but I think it's really important that you know who it is that's leading you. Because like it's just vitally important to your own spiritual health that you're being fed properly from someone that you can trust, that you can relate to.
Yeah.
Maybe not necessarily relate to, but that you can, find some common ground and at least understand like where they're coming from. Um, and have a good idea of does their personality behind the scenes match up with who they are on Sunday mornings?
Mm.
Like that's I think really important.
Yeah.
Um,
Totally.
to bring it back around, preliminary data in 2025 is showing that we are up from 27% in 2017 to 32% in
Hmm.
church attendance, weekly church attendance. That's a pretty significant jump um, in this short span of time, I would say. Not as large as that drop that we had from
Yeah.
2009 to 2017, but
Yeah.
it's still a good jump, up to 32%. So as of 2024, 30% of men attended weekly and 27% of women attended weekly, which I do find interesting. I would have thought that women attended church more regularly in our
Yeah.
country.
I would have thought that too. Just not to. Although I mean, there is still the aspect of it is the church. The Western Church is still a very patriarchal, for the most part,
Yeah.
is a very patriarchal thing. Um,
Mhm.
at the same time, though, there's been such a focus on like I want to feel the presence of God. I want to feel the Holy Spirit. My like
Mhm.
it's and not to be not to oversimplify things, but generally speaking, and there's a lot of secular psychology around this, not
Mhm.
just biblical stuff. Um, Men, generally speaking, are less in tune with our emotions. We're not necessarily pursuing our emotions. Not saying that we don't react to emotions or that we don't feel emotions. But in terms of where we generally live more in just our brains and and in tasks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so you would think that like in an environment where the church seems to be pursuing more feelings for the last however many years, it is a little surprising that there are slightly, but there are more men than women involved.
I
Because
have some theories as
yeah,
to
go
why
for
that
it.
is.
Yeah.
So from 2000 to 2015, according to Barna, women attended church at higher rates,
Hmm.
which matches up with my preconceived idea, what I grew up with. And from 2016 to 21, attendance was roughly equal
Hmm.
between men and women. Since 2021, it has been primarily men. And I will use this to springboard into one of my personal theories as to why I think we're starting to see a rebirth or a revival, if you will, among Christianity. And also, I do have a bit of a nuanced idea of like what all these numbers really mean. I
Hmm.
think part of this is a surge in popular voices.
Yeah.
Um, Everybody knows the Rogan podcast, and so you have voices like Joe Rogan, who's been inviting Christians onto his podcast much more in I would say the last 18 months than previously. But you have people in those sort of spheres who are starting to discuss spirituality and Christianity in a more favorable light. People like Jordan Peterson have brought a lot of light to this subject as far as like the I guess the merits behind it within like Western cultural civilization. Like this is the bedrock of Western culture, and people are
Yeah.
starting to kind of uncover that and realize it. Even recently, um, famous atheists, um, Richard Dawkins, he admitted that like I'm sad to see the degradation of like Western like cultural Christianity in my country, and I'm paraphrasing him here. He's like, I don't want the religion, but I do like the values and the culture that
Hmm.
came out of it because it's a proper society, it's a respectful society, and it's just something that was good. And now I'm starting to see a lot of that disappear, and I don't really like what's replacing it. And so
Yeah.
you even have people like Dawkins admitting that, like, within our culture, like the the lifestyle that we have come to expect is built on the back of Judeo-Christian values.
Yeah.
And then I would also point out people like Bishop Marmari Emmanuel, um, who people like him have just exploded on YouTube and garnered a lot of interest, especially from young people who are, passionate and, fiercely loyal to their faith and have intelligence and articulate, um, speaking. And so we have a lot of pop culture voices right now that are either warming up to Christianity or have been preaching Christianity with authenticity
Mm.
here. And that leads into a second point that I would say as to, why we're seeing a surge. Millennials and Gen Z have been in a deep, deep search for authenticity.
Yeah.
We have grown up with, the for millennials, the transition from the analog age to the digital age. And, we watched the birth of social media and how people started to curate themselves for an online image. And then Gen Z, that's all they've ever known.
Hmm.
They,
Yeah.
have essentially grown up with smartphones or tablets in their hands. And so now when it comes to searching for meaning and searching for purpose, like every human goes through, there's a particular emphasis on, I want something really authentic and really genuine.
Yeah.
And so I believe that when they're looking at Christianity, they're able to kind of, because they've had so much training and filtering and understanding, like,
Yeah.
what's real and what's fake, they're able to see past a lot of this, um, I guess, more of a facade of cultural Christianity and
Mhm.
see the people that are genuine about their faith, and they're exploring that and they're wanting to know more. Um, Again, I would also point out that there is a cultural rebound here.
Yeah.
People are seeing the fruits of naturalism and the new atheist movement, people like Richard Dawkins, and I think people are recoiling from that. There's a consistent pattern in human history where we will swerve from one ditch to another. We overcorrect into one direction and find something we don't like
No.
there. Yeah, and then we'll just yank the steering wheel back and go like all the way to the other side,
We would
and
never.
try to, yeah. And so that's just human nature. And so like we're rebounding from all those things where we were like, yeah, this has kind of been crazy. This has been a wild ride. I don't like where culture is going. I don't like what I'm seeing. I want to try that old thing again. And I think
Mm.
that's what's happening. Um, so you combine all of that, COVID, you had the isolation, distrust in government and your neighbors, etc., needing something stable to turn to, just like you mentioned with the 2009 housing crisis. People were in really dark, desperate places,
Yeah.
especially socially, like, with the lockdowns and everything, and they needed somewhere to turn to. And
Mhm.
so most homes have a Bible in them. I think, it's pretty easy to start investigating and looking into things. And then you have these popular voices that are really digging into who was Jesus actually as a person. And
Yeah.
so that has been a common question, like, genuine interest in the person of Jesus, not just in church, but as a result, people are starting to attend church. And
Yeah.
so I kind of want to conclude my monologue here by saying that, like, I would not call this a revival. I wouldn't.
Mm.
I don't think as a Christian I can say like, oh yes, there is a genuine rebirth in like spiritual belief and a serious uptick in genuine converts. But I think we are in a really special time where culture is starting to wake up to its need for Judeo-Christian values,
Yeah.
and they are exploring right now. And as a result, we're seeing a more favorable opinion toward Christianity and Christian values. And people, again, are recoiling from all the like the nonsense and the craziness that we've seen over the last decade, especially when it comes to like the political sphere and like, whether or not you believe in this or not. Like, I think it's just scientifically, and I'm not saying you, Jacob, but I'm saying like in the political sphere, like especially when it comes to like left leaning politics, like you can believe that there are, 27, 50 different genders if you want, but like science doesn't even support that. And so it's just like it's gone so crazy and so wild. And I
Yeah.
cannot tell you how many conversations I've had with like old school liberals who are like, dude, the Democratic Party is just kind of nuts right now.
Yeah.
And and I'm talking like old school, like New York liberals, like, JFK liberals, like even Bill Clinton liberals.
Yeah.
They're all just like, dude, this is kind of insane. Like, it's just
Yeah.
weird right now. And so people are recoiling from that. They're like, nah, I don't like that. That's kind of gross, kind of weird. Um, and people are starting to look for something that makes a little bit more sense, something that's a little bit more stable, a little bit more traditional and homey. And I think they are finding their answer to that in Christianity and who the person of Jesus is. And we're in a culturally explorative time where people are starting to return to the idea of, or they are warming back up to the idea of Christianity.
Yeah, I think with that, both from with that cultural rebound, you have the last, I don't know, like you said, over the last probably, especially over the last decade. I mean, I know it's been happening for longer, but especially over the last decade, there's been such a push for just trying to, like you said, swerve from one side to the other. We had such a legalistic, condemning Christian culture that people were wanting to get away from because it was just judgmental, and there was more slapping of the wrist than there was giving hope. And so people, that's why there was the uptick after the housing crisis, because people were like, well, yeah, I don't like the wrist slapping, but there's some hope there. There's more hope than what I have right now. But then the giant fall off happened because, well, the economy started growing back up again. Things started getting better. And so then they're like, oh, hey, I don't need this anymore because I have my own hope. I have a relative of mine who I've been praying for years, who he believes there's a good place. He believes there's a bad place. He thinks that good people go to the good place and bad people go to the bad place, and you just have to try to do more good than bad. And he calls it his own religion, essentially. And the thing is, the crazy part is he's nicer than most Christians I know. He lives out Christian values more than most Christians I know. But also, he's having known him and like just known, like, again, it's one of my relatives. They've never been at a point where they're like hopeless, where they're like gonna lose the house, like or any kind of a situation like that. And I don't want them to get into that kind of a situation, but at the same time, I'm like, what's it gonna take for him to realize that he needs Jesus? And I think that is what people are realizing, is they're seeing what happens to a society that originally was more Jesus focused, God focused, even if it was religious and legalistic. They're seeing what happens when you move away from that and you try to just completely reject it. They're seeing the society shift and they're going, oh no, this is too far on the other side. Maybe there was actually something to that. Maybe we should look into that some more. And so there's this interest also of just, what is it actually? And I think that's a big thing that happened right after COVID. I think in two different ways. One, with the people who continued in church, who stayed in church. Like I said earlier, like, we were all asking, why are we doing this? Why are we still gathering? Both as staff and as attendees. Why do we actually gather? We had to start asking the hard questions. And so we essentially got more sure in our faith. We became more firm in our faith. We became more zealous, more passionate for the church, for God, for the Bible, for our relationship with Jesus. It helped deepen our relationship with God. So you had an enriching of the existing church, but then also you have other people who are looking at it and going, well, why should I do it? and they start looking at it with fresh eyes instead of looking at it through the eyes of religion and legalism. They do a what I would call a healthy deconstruction, where it's not a deconstruction in the sense of I'm throwing everything out the window and I'm trying to see how this could be wrong, but a deconstruction in the sense of I'm going to dive down to see what my preconceived notions are, what my presuppositions are, and I'm going to read the Bible to see what it says, to see if what it says lines up with what I believe. And what a lot of them found out was, oh, this is what I thought the Bible said, but that's not actually what the Bible says. It brought back this authenticity for the Bible, like we were talking about earlier. We're especially with millennials and Gen Z, we're big on authenticity. It brought back this authenticity for what the Bible actually says. So then it made people go, huh, well, I wonder what else Christianity as a religion, as a tradition, as a system, as an organization, I wonder what else Christianity may have told me that wasn't actually true, that wasn't actually biblical. I wonder if maybe Jesus is worth looking into, separate from what all the people I grew up watching or knowing portrayed him to be. And so they started actually looking into, well, who is God? Who is Jesus? They started asking those questions, and because at that point, like we said, the church had kind of been whittled down a lot to people who were more firm in their foundation at the time. These people who started then coming to the church saying like, hey, can you explain this to me? Or like, hey, what about? And started challenging things. They were actually able to be met with answers, or with people who would say, I don't know, but let's find out. And because I feel like that was a big part of what was missing before COVID, was people weren't willing to say, I don't know, when asked a question about the Bible. Or it was, I don't know, you'd have to ask my pastor. But then, like you said, a lot of times the pastor's inaccessible. And so then the person never gets their question answered. What has been replaced with is a culture within the church that says it's okay to say you don't know, as long as then you say, let's go to the Bible and find out. Let's go to the Bible and research this. And so it purified a lot of the conversation as well. It purified a lot of the answers when interest would be had, because of the fact that we were going back to the source. We weren't just trying to spout what we have always been taught or spout what we have from tradition. We were actually going through and backing it up with scripture. And so I think people actually got interested in Jesus again in a way that it wasn't just Christianity. It wasn't just about how do I escape hell. It was, hey, who is Jesus? And that that's actually been something I've been doing with my youth group lately. Is like, hey guys, like, are you here just because you're trying to get a get out of hell free card, or are you here because you want to have a relationship with God? Because it's never about just trying to escape hell, and the way to escape hell is to be in relationship with God. It's no, the motivation is the fact that you finally realize who Jesus is, you realize how much God loves you, and that drives you to then want to be with him. And
funnily enough,
that's the thing. That's heaven, is getting to be with him.
Funnily enough, escaping hell was my primary motivator at 5. So
same.
That was earliest memories for accepting Christ. That's where it started for me.
I would say up until the age of like 17. That was it for me. It really wasn't until I was like 17 years old at youth camp where I first like truly had a revelation of like how much God loved me, and where it actually impacted me in my heart, as opposed to just knowing that God loved me. Actually finally being like, oh, that's how much you love me. Holy cow, why? Like, and it's just because I do, because you're my kid. I'm like, oh, okay.
That's nice.
I'm starting to get it now. And I've, yeah, 17.
Mine, I feel like my transition out of just being scared happened pretty quickly. I'd probably say around 8 years old or whatever. I just had a genuine interest in like trying to like actually model
Mm.
Jesus's behavior. I mean, it helped that my dad had become a youth pastor and um I got to sit in on the discussions with the older kids
Yeah.
for most of my youth. So that was incredibly helpful for me because I had a mind that like wanted to be challenged in that particular area.
Hmm.
And it just worked out for me that way. I'm extremely grateful and like blessed for my upbringing. Didn't have like a wild phase or anything like that. I always like to joke around that I'm like the one pastor's kid who didn't go crazy. But um no, I mean it was a good
We're
upbringing
talking
for me,
about
I will
you,
say.
Lee.
Oh, oh,
I'm sure Lee's watching this, or at least the recording.
ouch. Shots fired. Hey, there was
Lee
actually
didn't have
one.
one of those phases, as far as I know.
No, I don't think so either. No. There was one other thing that I've also noticed over the last few years that's been happening within the church, is people within the church are tired of all of the all the squabbles that we
Yeah.
have and all the things that keep dividing us. And so there's more of a move over the last couple of years with even within the church to try to break down some of those walls and make the church more unified and actually treat each other like we're on the same team. Obviously, there are still a lot of churches that are very competitive and jealous, and they're like, no, they're from that church. You can't hang out with them. And for whatever reason, not going to go there. But seeing that there's actually people within the church who are wanting to be with each other, even though we disagree on some things, finally actually kind of like Jesus said, they will know you're my disciples by your love for one another. And so when you have a church and a church and a church and they each are like just bad-mouthing each other, or they're just saying like, they're not necessarily bad-mouthing, but there's always this the kind of like, oh, that church, oh yeah, they're yeah, I know that church. Like, and that's the attitude. Like, it gives this idea that we're just trying to keep people in our own little country club, and that if you leave our country club and you go to a different country club that ultimately is based in the same thing, but it's not ours, well, now, we're not talking to you anymore. And like all of your friends, and it just becomes awkward. And so there's been a push in the last few years to try to break down those barriers. I mean, even here where I'm at in Ocala, there's a worship group that that puts on worship nights around the community, around the county, and there's the group has like 50 something people in it. But they're from like 30 something different churches.
Yeah.
Like, and the fact that they all get together and are able to worship, and some of them are from like full Assemblies of God, like we're running up and down the aisles. Others are from like Baptist style churches where their congregations are standing there looking and their mouths are barely moving half the time during a worship set, and they're all able to come together and worship together in a multicultural, multi-ethnic setting where they celebrate their differences, they celebrate the things that make them unique from each other, because of the fact that they say, you know what, this thing that we disagree on, ultimately, we're probably still both going to heaven. So while I'll disagree with you on that, and I'll probably still argue with you if it comes up. It's I don't think it's something that's worth dividing ourselves over. I don't think it's something that's worth us basically just saying, yeah, I don't want to talk to you anymore. And so I think people are seeing that happen, and they're seeing these groups pop up around the country that are doing things like that, and it's making them see like, oh, they're actually starting to live it out.
Yeah, I think I want to bring it back to some of these stats that we're getting out of the UK in particular.
Yeah.
Among 18 to 24-year-olds, we're seeing monthly church attendance rise from 4% in 2018 to 16% in 2024.
That's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's a huge jump.
4%. That's a shift from millennial to Gen Z, isn't it?
18 to 24. What was the year? It was 2018 to 2024.
Yeah, so that's from 2018 to 24, and then 18 to 24-year-olds.
A 24-year-old in 2018 would have been the absolute youngest millennial. So actually, that's pretty. Actually, that's almost entirely Gen Z.
Yeah.
There's only 1 year that millennials would have been in there. The rest would have all been Gen Z.
And
I think
from
the cutoff is 96.
Yeah, from what little I know, the UK has been less favorably disposed toward Christianity than we have been. Like to a degree, I'd say we've probably been like 10, 15, maybe 20 years behind them in that regard.
Yeah.
But yes, so young men went from 4% to 21% during that time period, and then young women from 3 to 12% during that time period. And those stats are from YouGov.
Wow. So men times 5 increased 500%, and women increased 400%. Yeah. That's a lot.
Yeah, as I heard one person put it, that like young men jumped up from like almost nobody to 1 in every 5 young men was attending church.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean it's quite the jump. Again, I want to like ask the question, what are we seeing here exactly? Yeah. I think part of it again is with that cultural rebound. Joe Rogan himself actually pointed this out, I believe within the last year, as to how, like, for the longest time, Christianity was like the only religion that you were allowed to make fun of. Like it was openly mocked, but you couldn't say anything about like Hinduism or Buddhism or Islam. And with Christianity, it was just like openly mocked across culture. Yeah. And there's a question like, why? What's the reason for that? And so I think that is another point of interest for people, is like, because eventually you start to pick up on that. You start to notice that it's like, it's consistently throughout culture, but it's usually portrayed in a negative light. Like, what is the reason? I would also point to books, and I guess talking points, if you will, that have really stood out over the last couple of decades. So works from people like J. Warner Wallace and Lee Strobel with like, Cold Case Christianity. And what was Lee Strobel's book?
You're talking about Case for Christ, or is there a newer one?
Yes, I think so. The Case for Christ.
Yeah.
That was Lee Strobel, right?
Yeah. Which, by the way, if you're looking for a resource and like for somebody who's wanting to try to disprove if they're asking like, hey, how can we know if the Bible is like true or not and stuff like that, fantastic book, because that's literally the story of why he wrote that book. He started off as an atheist trying to disprove the Bible, and as he read the Bible and tried to disprove it, ended up convincing himself that it was true.
And he was a writer for the Chicago Tribune, I believe. Like
I
I
think
I
so.
want to say he was a journalist for the Chicago Tribune. So his whole MO was investigating and diving down to the bottom of things,
Yeah.
um, for written works. And then he undertook that pursuit to convince his wife that like her Christianity was crazy, or her newfound Christianity was insane. And then he ended up converting himself. He treated it much like a courtroom case,
Yeah.
similarly to J. Warner Wallace in that regard. And so again, we're starting to have the word get out for things like this. Like, the historicity behind the gospels is unlike anything else that we have,
Yep.
um, in ancient times. Just to highlight Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars, we widely regard this as fact, and the earliest copy that we have of the originals is dated 1,000 years after the events, and we teach this as history.
Yeah.
1,000 years, and yet with the Gospels, we have letters that are dated to within 30 years of the events that happened.
Yep.
And so it's just like is not even close. And then we have hundreds and thousands of copies of a lot of these manuscripts. There's so much historical evidence from the archaeology, from the writings around it, from non-biblical sources like Josephus, the Jewish historian, who talk about Jesus. And there were, I wish I could remember the name off the top of my head, but I remember there was another writer from a distant land who was talking about how, like, the miracle worker Jesus, a famed
Mm-hmm.
like miracle worker or magician, and they had supposed that he had learned his tricks in Egypt, as which it's just funny. It's like, we have all of these ancient writings that lend credence to the story,
Mm-hmm.
and there's just so much historicity to it
Yeah.
that people are starting to see, like, oh, you can actually trust the Bible. And so I would say that is another aspect of it. But
Yeah.
again, can we call this a revival? I'm not sold yet. Um, I'm not
I,
seeing like a great spiritual awakening, but I'm
yeah.
starting to see people warm up to it, and they're exploring for sure.
I could definitely see the ground being prepared for
Yeah.
revival with this. Um, I don't know that I would personally necessarily call it a revival yet, just because, like,
Mhm.
I mean, generally for me, for that kind of a thing, it would have to be a lot more widespread. It would have to be
Yeah.
like an explosion, if you will, essentially.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm not seeing that yet, but we are seeing surprisingly large numbers. We're seeing
Yeah.
a surprising uptick in those numbers, which does indicate that something's happening.
Mhm.
Something's definitely happening. God is moving, and people are at the very least seeming to be open to it, which
Yeah.
I would say is kind of the first step to revival, is just recognizing the need,
Yeah.
recognizing that there's something that you don't have,
Mhm.
that and you need to figure out what will provide it. And I think that's what's happening right now. And
Yeah.
and that's could very easily be the springboard
Mhm.
to a full-blown revival, which would be amazing.
Yeah. And we'll kind of wrap it up here. I
Yeah.
think at the end of the day, like, humans are innately spiritual beings. You and I know
Mhm.
that. I think the world has known that for a while, and so they've tried to fulfill that like spiritual need.
Mhm.
As C.S. Lewis once put it, and I'm paraphrasing here, but if I find in myself desires that nothing in this world can satisfy, I must conclude that my desires are for something that is not of this world.
That's a great
Again,
quote.
we are innately, I might have messed that up a bit, but
That's
the
okay.
original
It's
is a
still a
very
great
good
quote.
quote. um, I love C.S. Lewis, but we are innately spiritual beings. We have a deep spiritual need that needs to be met and needs to be fulfilled in order for us to have that sense of purpose and fulfillment that
Yep.
endures, that lasts. You may find your sense of purpose and fulfillment in playing football, but the moment you lose your legs, like that's gone.
Yeah.
Like you have to have something that is eternal, that is unmoving, that cannot be shaken. And you and I would obviously say that that is Jesus. Like that is the only thing you can ultimately put your faith in.
Yeah.
But again, people have tried to fill that need, that spiritual need, with Wicca, with New Age, with a multitude of different religions that at the end of the day have held little benefit to them, or
Mm,
have not fundamentally transformed their lives. And
yeah.
that's where I believe Christianity is different, because it's the one religion where God comes down to serve man.
Yeah.
um, and it fulfills that spiritual need that is within us. And thankfully people are waking up to the fact that they have that need, and that maybe Christianity is not what they once thought it was. Again, that
Mhm.
cultural rebound where, maybe with, I hate to harp on the boomers here, but, that generation, I know Gen X was particularly, um, disgusted, I guess, by the heavy-handed fire and brimstone, like you said,
Mm,
the slap on the wrist sort of Christianity that might have been passed down to them. And so then we had the new atheist movement, and then, Christianity really fell out of vogue. And then, just it continued with, I would say, like, the mega church, and it just feeling really inauthentic. And then the church continuing to lose influence on the culture, and then trying to look more like the world around it. And then, ultimately we got to the bottom of the barrel with the church. And then COVID hits, and people are deconstructing, and the church in the West has been a lot more distilled. And now we're starting to see people warm up to this idea of maybe there's actually something there in the authentic form of Christianity, and
yeah.
people are exploring that, and I'm grateful for that.
Same. Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
any final thoughts besides that?
those were my final thoughts.
Okay, that's yeah. And those were mine too. So with that, yeah, I guess that's where we'll wrap up for this week. Hey, if you have any
Disagree with
thoughts
us
on
in
this,
Discord.
yeah. If you have thoughts on this, go check out our Discord. We have a Discord channel that we do respond to. So go there, join that. There's links below where you can do that. If you haven't already, make sure that you like, comment, subscribe on the video, ring the bell so you get notified when we go live. We generally go live twice a month on Thursday nights around 8:30, 9 o'clock ish. So set that on your calendar. I think we actually have a calendar that you can subscribe to, in fact. Possibly. I don't know if that's in the links or not.
Yeah,
but
I don't know if
hopefully
that's
not
publicly
legally.
available anywhere.
I don't know if that's publicly available anywhere yet either, but we're working on that one. We're still kind of getting some of our things going. So, yeah, talk to us on Discord. Talk to us in the comments here. Let us know what you think. If there's a topic that you would like for us to dive into, if you have questions about something, mention that. Ask that. You might even potentially be brought onto the show to have a conversation with us. So, but until next time, we love you guys. We hope you have a great week. We'll see you next time.